Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on mobile device management. My name is Stefan Benar, CTO and co-founder of N3 Solutions. I'm sitting here with Steve Bogie and Frank Milalo. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stefan, and thank you.
The focus of today's webinar is to compare two approaches to manage the fleet of portable devices the mechanic uses daily to perform their task. Some airlines have decided to provide each mechanic a device. We will refer to this one as the dedicated approach, and some other opted for a pool of devices shared across all mechanics. We will refer to that one as the shared approach. We will discuss and review the pros and cons of these two options. But before we get into the session, please note that there is a question box on the right portion of your screen. Feel free throughout the session to type in your question. We will answer as many as we can at the end. If we don't get to your question, don't worry, we will answer it via email in the following days. Without any further ado, I will let Steve and Frank introduce themselves, starting with Frank. Why don't you go ahead?
Good morning, everybody. As Stefan mentioned, my name is Frank Melillo. Over 30 years in the airline industry, started my career in the United States Air Force, moved on to the original Pan Am, America West Airlines, US Airways, and American Airlines. At both American Airlines and US Airways, I had responsibility for base maintenance at a senior level, as well as quality control at a senior level. So that is me.
Steve?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Stefan and Frank. Great to join you, gentlemen. This is Steve Bogie. As Frank had mentioned, I've also got over 30 years in commercial aviation, generally with the Air Canada Jazz family. I started my career in airport operations, moved into system operations control, and then into the technology side of the business, where I ended my career in 2020 before joining the Aero A team as a partner and continuing our focus on technology in the aviation space and helping commercial airlines move forward.
Thank you, guys. Very impressive background. As an introduction to the core of the subject, I'd like to have your views on the transition to mobility in the industry as a whole. We have been discussing paperless operation for a while. I'm always surprised to still see lots of MRO and line maintenance department running on paper. So I'd like to have your view on the state of this transition and also the importance of it as it's related to compliancy, risk mitigation, and operation efficiency. So let's start with you, Steve, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. As we exit pandemic, and everybody knows that the severe impact that had on commercial aviation and aviation overall, we're actually starting to see a trend of cost and operational efficiency focus from most carriers. And what this means is heightened awareness on the ability for, in this case, in this example, mechanics and those supporting aircraft operations and MRO operations to be completely dedicated to their job. As a result of that, airlines and MROs are turning their attention to technology and their focus to technology in an effort to drive efficiency. Both digital and mobility is playing a critical component in getting incremental hard time or maximum hard time, we'll call it, for mechanics, AMEs, and support functions on the aircraft. As mentioned, this is a new and evolving trend. It's been in existence for a while, but there is a heightened awareness we've seen over the last couple of years, and we see an acceleration of this as we look into the short, medium, and longer term futures.
All right, you want to add to that, Frank?
Yeah, so good point, Stephen. So from the end user perspective, in the heavy maintenance environment, so we're always focusing on increasing optimization, right? So what that means is creating an environment where the technician can can do everything he needs to do on a daily basis or a shift basis while staying on or near the aircraft. And access to technical publications is just one of them. So this is something that we have been looking forward to and always strive to do over the years, and that point is now. And this is just a great opportunity, at least in the base maintenance environment, to move forward with this. So
Yeah. Can I have also your views on the compliance aspect to this? Because obviously, the transition to mobility, if I'm not mistaken, will also help the airlines to comply more
yeah.
regulatory bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, from the maintenance perspective, having the publications of the reference documentation with the correct rev status all the time is key, right? So we don't have to worry about making sure that the rev status is always up to date or whether or not they are operating off of documentation with the right rev status. A big thing in the base maintenance environment, the heavy maintenance environment, is uncontrolled documentation. So all too often we get non-compliance findings because there are outdated references that might be on a toolbox or on a stand or on the aircraft. And those uncontrolled documents is a non-compliance occurrence in the heavy maintenance environment. This eliminates that, obviously. So yeah, so that's it. And again, going back to the rev status, ensuring that the rev status is always up to date is huge.
I assume it's fairly complex actually to do this transition, even though, because like I said earlier, I was a bit surprised to see that the corporation are still, a lot of them are still paper based. I don't know, Frank, not Frank, sorry, Steve, from a technology perspective, what does that entail to make that transition to paperless? I assume it's bigger than I can imagine because obviously everybody would be there already. So maybe you can talk to that a bit.
So moving to paperless, you're right. It's certainly not a flip of a light switch. It involves a lot of coordination. It involves good system partners, good system integration, good training of the people on the new processes, as well as actually designing those processes and procedures that are sound, they're straightforward, and they meet the obligations to the regulator. And first and foremost is kind of the repository where these documents would sit. So you need to kind of build the foundation, if you will, and transition yourself to digital documents. And once that's sound, you have the sign off from the regulator that they accept that, and you transition it over, and then you would generally fairly quickly overlay the mobility perspective. From a true IT technical perspective, the systems there's some mature systems out there. You want to integrate those systems tightly with your Active Directory or whatever, or whichever authentication program you're on, to make sure the right people have access to the right systems at the right time. But once you've done that and you make that transition, and Frank talked about the old documents or the outdated documents and the compliance implications, but once you've made the transition to digital and mobile, there is a speed and efficiency, and rather than taking days, weeks, and months to do revs and distribute the paper, reprint the paper, pull the paper in and out of manuals, doing it in a digital format can literally be done in hours as opposed to days and weeks. And when you think about the savings in your shipping costs of boxes of paper, particularly for very large airlines that would have to ship that to multiple destinations that they fly to all over the world, and as well as just the straight printing costs and, you know, the environmental impact of all of that. So, you know, there is lots of benefits to moving in this direction. But as you said at the beginning, it's not just a light switch flip, and it should be well thought out, well planned. And I would encourage carriers looking at doing it to be very closely tied with the business, the frontline workers, as well as their regulator as they go through the process.
But if I understand you correctly, you feel that there's no technology hurdle at this point. Technology is there. It's more a question of implementation, which was probably not true 10 years ago.
Fair assessment, yeah, and I would definitely say that this is not a technology problem, Stefan. This is a willingness to change. This is a people change management question and process. This is not a technology challenge.
Got it. Got it. All right, so now let's dive in the core of this webinar. Is it going to be dedicated or a shared approach? What's the best model for your organization? All airlines had or will have to go through the process of evaluating which way to go, and it's clearly not obvious. The kind of question you will have to ask yourself is, for example, do you want my mechanics to be responsible for the device and or content-related tasks like updating OS, updating the apps, making sure that the technical publications are synced properly? That's at the beginning, you know, it may seem manageable, but over time, the number of apps will grow and the data for these apps will get more complex and larger. So this is important, especially if you want locally hosted content, which is important to ensure data is always available for your mechanic, even if your Wi-Fi or cellular connection, for example, is weak in some areas or not available at all. So let me elaborate on this some more. Almost all the apps that deal with content have online capabilities. So the data is always available as long as the network is. By having locally hosted content, it enables the mechanic to always have his access to this data to do this job. So it provides for a more robust and high availability solution while increasing the efficiency of your workforce. This is not to be minimized, as over the last 10 years, this model of having data on the devices, in addition to online access, has proven to be more efficient, a better approach, and definitely more reliable. This is one of the questions. Another one would be, how do we deal with spares? You will need spares because equipment will fail, a device will be lost or won't be updated properly. Mechanic will come in the morning with a device not charged enough to do it for the day, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, should your mechanic be responsible? I will ask the opinion of my colleague here in a few minutes. Now let's look at the shared device model. In that specific case, your IT and logistic team will have the burden. The logistic folks will manage the hardware, meaning device check-in, check-out. They will have to track the device, track the user, manage the repair, and manage the spares as well. This could become a cumbersome task as you grow your fleet of devices. At the beginning, with a few hundred, it's fine. When you get to 1,000, it gets complicated. On the IT side, they will manage the content of these devices with all that that entails. In the end, it will be time-consuming and costly, but at least in that specific case, the appropriate staff is doing what they're good at. With that said, I'd like to get the opinion of my expert. I'd like Frank to comment first on this from an operation perspective, and then Steve can add on from an engineering standpoint. Frank, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm in the court of the shared perspective. So you know what, technicians are technicians. They want to fix airplanes. They don't want to have to maintain a computer or a device or a tablet. They don't want to do that. Sometimes, as many people know, we have a hard enough time getting a technician to enter data into the enterprise system that they're currently using, right? So we have to make that as easy as possible for the technician. So placing that burden of updates and the controllability and the control of the device on a system that M3 is offering here is, to me at least, beneficial. So at the end of the day, the mechanic returns the unit to its proper place, and he's off until the next day, and he doesn't have to worry about accountability of it. Also, I think that having the shared responsibility of maintaining the device maintains the integrity of the unit itself, right? I guess, again, I'm in the court of a shared device for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah. So I won't start with which court I land in, but I think that'll become fairly obvious fairly soon. With most of these decisions, each carrier will have different priorities and will have different philosophies around approaching it. And there are definitely pros and cons, but putting the onus on people to keep the devices updated, particularly in an environment where you're looking at compliance, you're looking at a shortage of skilled resources. These become mission critical devices when we start to remove the paper, because there is no fallback, right, other than additional devices. So if they don't get updated, if they are some ransomware gets on them because of somebody's using them at home for a non-work activity, if they forget to plug them in and the battery goes dead halfway through their shift, there are implications on the organization and potentially disruptions to the organizations as you look at trying to get airplanes serviced and back out online. So, there's certainly some risk associated with the dedicated device. Let me give a couple of quick pros. I mean, the personalization can sometimes be an employee benefit, that they look at and gain ownership of it. There is also, you can extend beyond what we've talked about here into training and offsite training and different items such as that. So, there is some upside to a dedicated device. I can tell you that, we looked at both options very closely, and in the end, we decided to go with the managed device, and it proved very quickly to be the right decision. We were very comfortable that the devices were tracked, they were always up to date, they were always charged. And to Stefan's point, if there was some sort of issue with either the charging and or the content updating or other kind of technical issues, we knew about it right away, and we could dispatch an IT technician to deal with the issue rather than worry about a non-trained individual trying to troubleshoot it out on the front line. So in our case, we very quickly came to the conclusion that the benefits of the shared model far outweighed any risk and was the preferred solution for Air Canada.
Good. So it looks like we're all in agreement that each team member of an organization should focus on what they're skilled for. So mechanics stay at the plane, logistics team manage the device, and the IT team deals with device content or anything related to IT around the device. This is, of course, easy to say, and we realized it could be complex to implement in all tool cribs. And that's exactly why M3 Solution developed the M3 platform, actually. The system essentially automates the processes that the logistic and IT team will need to do in a shared mode environment. And actually, we developed the concept with Air Canada back in 2015, where we were first approached, and the idea was exactly that. I mean, shared approach is a better approach for them, but we needed to eliminate essentially the heavy lifting of the content management and also asset tracking and maintenance. And so that's how the M3 platform came to fruition. So I'll take a few minutes to summarize the solution, if you don't mind. So the solution can be defined by two main components, essentially: the hardware, the kiosk hardware, and the content management software. The kiosk itself controls access to the devices via a card reader, so your badging system, essentially. It could be an RFID, an NFC, or other type of reader. So when the device is in the kiosk, it is physically locked. So you will need your badge to check it out. And while the device is in the kiosk, it charges and communicate with our backend software. And that, we'll talk about it a little later, but that enables content management. So generally, the solution supports tablets and laptop, and we have these both deployed at some of our customers, including Air Canada. The system support all major OS, Mac OS, iOS, Windows, and Android, and it's fully scalable. So we have few installation with only a few dozens of devices, and some with thousands. But and most of the time, the kiosk is installed in a self-serve environment. So in the hangar, for example, so check-in and check-out is done by the mechanics. You don't need the overhead. So then you eliminate the logistic part of it. So when a mechanic needs a device, it goes to the kiosk, take out a device, and go to work. If he breaks it or runs a battery, he comes back to the kiosk and take a new one. So all this logistic is taken care of by the kiosk. This is for the hardware, essentially. And as you can see, this really automates the logistic component. On the software side, the main function of the solution is to automate content deployment of any kind. It could be an app update, it could be an OS update, it could be technical publication deployment, or any other content that requires to be sideloaded to a specific application. By integrating with these apps, and that's what we do all the time, that's our bread and butter, essentially, the process becomes totally seamless and really zero touch. So the IT team is not involved at all when it comes down to content management. So we have a team actually dedicated to that, to automation, and we're constantly integrating apps from different vendors in order to satisfy that goal, which is seamless and zero touch operation. Additionally, the device can the solution can wipe clean the device after usage. This is something that most of our customer uses. So there's no login information or browsing information from the previous user on the device. And we can also upload the information before performing a wipe. Sometimes it's required if there's some data that needs to be synced for the next user. So you don't want to lose that data set. So we'll upload the data to a target and then wipe the device. This is all things that are configurable by users. For a simple task, related to device management, we've integrated with best-of-breed MDM. For iOS and Mac OS, we use Jamf. For Android, we use Nox, and for Windows, we use Microsoft Tools. So in a nutshell, this is the solution. The goal was always to make the shared device model the approach of choice. And by doing this automation, we believe it removes all the pain point related to its implementation. And as we said earlier, the pain point is being able to logistically and from an IT perspective, to be able to have teams in place where you need them across your organization to do these tasks. And that was basically this was the goal of when we defined the system with Air Canada in 2015. This, of course, for the ones that haven't used the system, very theoretical. So at this point, I'd like to ask Steve to basically talk about the system, as he's got hands-on experience with the solution when you deployed it at Air Canada. And it started in 2015, it's already 8 years ago. And I remember at the time, Air Canada was using one app and one data sync component. And now they have probably 12 apps and tons of data to sync all the time. And I think this is important because when you start, you don't know, by implementing automation, you're future-proof. But anyway, I'll let Steve comment on it.
Thanks, Stefan. And certainly you bring up a couple of good points, and let me kind of speak to them through the course of a little discussion here. So, at Air Canada, what we did is, in much to Stefan's chagrin, we did not start with we're going to use M3 Touch and this is what we're going to do. Back to the earlier part of this conversation, we actually started with the concept of how do we keep a mechanic plainside working on an airplane. And in the crew world, they call it hard time. So that term kind of stuck. And the idea was give the individual a mobile device with all of the digital content that they need to keep them plainside, whether it's aircraft manuals, IPCs, whether it's a view of the inventory, stock, what they have, schedule time for the aircraft, and even links to specialty trades like fleet specialists and other things, tools that we had provided. That was our view and that was our goal. And Stefan mentioned we started out with one app. This was a walk before you run type of approach, where we wanted to start slow, but scale it fairly quickly thereafter. So, we actually started out with using dedicated devices, and we just realized very quickly on in the process that it was very difficult to manage, very difficult to handle, and we were experiencing some of the challenges we talked about a little bit earlier with devices that hadn't been updated, hadn't been synced, hadn't been charged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we looked around for different solutions, and through a process ended up with Stefan and M3 Touch. And I guess I would say that the rest is kind of history. We're here talking about it, and Air Canada continues to use it today. Probably a couple of other points, as we go along. A lot of this wasn't without its challenges, and all the best things in life have challenges. And Stefan referred to how, as we scaled, a lot of the infrastructure that we had in our hangar facilities was, dated at best, and had to be upgraded along the way to accommodate, the large volumes of data that we were syncing back and forth to our M&E system, to our content management system, to things like Boeing Toolbox, et cetera, et cetera. So, and, one kind of important factor for those that aren't aware, at the time when we first implemented, Air Canada was flying Airbus, Embraer, Boeing, and Bombardier airplanes. So we had every OEM under the sun that we had to address. And again, it was a full scope, had to take care of all of these aircraft, and we wanted a single device So we didn't get into, well, that's a Boeing laptop or that's a Boeing iPad. So, all of those were built into the solution set. So we had to scale and build a lot of the infrastructure accordingly and put process and controls to ensure that the right people had it. We also didn't want to rebuild redundant solutions. So, for example, we synchronized it to our corporate authentication systems to make sure that we had the right authentication systems. We linked the devices back to our corporate cybersecurity plan and built that out to make sure that devices were secure, and Stefan touched on that. And they were all registered centrally with our IT support organization and asset management organizations, so that it was all seamless and it was really just an extension of what we did today. Again, a little more work when we did it, but certainly paid dividends in the long run, and it stopped us from creating dual and parallel both systems and processes. So maybe I'll just end there, and Stefan, if there's anything else you want to add. I know you were very involved in the implementation.
I remember.
Yes.
A lot of hard work, but it paid off. Actually, right now things are just sailing, and we're just adding stuff to it as we go. So,
yeah.
You know what? I'd like to just add a couple of things that we might not have touched on yet. You know what? When we talk about heavy maintenance environments and MROs, we should always be focusing on safety, quality, schedule, and cost, right? So, there is a safety element here as well. When you have a system that like this that M3 is offering, space in many hangars is a premium, right? So, and then when we talk in terms of productive labor and non-productive labor, there are many organizations that have a separate room that's got all of their laptops and all of their computers and all their equipment in. That room might be on the opposite end of the hangar. Of course, that is unproductive labor when you've got that technician traveling across the hangar, going to that room and doing what he needs to do, printing up the reference data and going back to the airplane. Again, unproductive labor. So, the more area and space that's freed up in the hangar environment, the more organized we can be, which of course can lead to an increased safety and lower safety risks as well. So mechanics, when they're using desktops, sometimes they might forget to sign out, right? And they're still signed into the computer. So there's another compliance aspect to that we haven't touched on yet. So shared device, that unit is with that person and is under controllability of that person at all times. And then, of course, the costs that are tied with computers and monitors and printers and the seating and the real estate for all of those things in the hangar environment is virtually non-existent with a system like this as well. So those are just some of the items that we might not have touched on yet that I see from a leadership perspective in the heavy maintenance environment that are obviously an advantage. So.
Yeah. So, and Frank, those are great ads. Thanks very much. And, I referred a little bit on the line maintenance to keeping a mechanic beside the aircraft. But, those that are operating into hub airports can fully appreciate that desktop computer isn't everywhere all the time. And, there can be significant travel distances from the gate you happen to be at to find one of those, or, even farther back to a hangar to check inventory if you're not connected and have view on your inventory availability. So great points. Thanks.
Yep.
Great. Good. Excellent, guys. Thank you very much for all the good input.